Dawn breaks over the North Atlantic in the summer of 1943, and beneath these deceptively calm waters lurks death itself. German U-boats, silent predators of the deep, have turned this vast ocean into a graveyard for Allied shipping. Merchant vessels carrying vital supplies to Britain are being picked off one by one, their crews swallowed by the icy depths before they can even send a distress call. The statistics tell a brutal story that keeps Winston Churchill awake at night, pacing the corridors of the Admiralty as reports of losses mount with each passing day. Between 1940 and 1942, the Allies lost over 3,500 merchant ships to U-boat attacks. That's more than 14 million tons of shipping sent to the bottom of the Atlantic, representing not just steel and cargo, but the lifeblood of Britain itself. Food, fuel, ammunition, aircraft, tanks, medical supplies, raw materials for factories, everything Britain needed to survive was disappearing beneath the waves faster than it could be replaced. The island nation was slowly being strangled by an invisible enemy that struck without warning and vanished into the depths like phantoms of the deep. The human cost was staggering. Thousands of merchant sailors, many of them civilians who had volunteered to keep the supply lines open, perished in the frigid waters of the Atlantic. Ships would explode without warning, their crews having mere minutes to abandon ship before the vessel disappeared forever. Survivors faced hours or days in lifeboats, battling exposure, dehydration, and the constant fear that rescue might never come. Those lucky enough to be picked up often returned to sea within weeks, knowing that each voyage might be their last. Admiral Karl Dönitz, the architect of Germany's submarine warfare strategy, had perfected what he called the wolf pack tactic. Groups of U-boats would coordinate their attacks, overwhelming convoy defenses through sheer numbers and surprise. His submarines operated with near impunity, their commanders growing bold and confident as victory after victory mounted. The Battle of the Atlantic was being won by Germany, and Britain's survival hung by a thread thinner than anyone dared to admit publicly. Dönitz understood that he didn't need to invade Britain to defeat it. He simply needed to sink ships faster than the Allies could build them, starve the island nation into submission, and force Churchill to negotiate peace. By 1942, it seemed this strategy was working. German U-boat production was accelerating. New bases in occupied France brought submarines closer to the vital shipping lanes, and experienced crews were becoming increasingly lethal with each patrol. The Royal Navy's response followed conventional wisdom that had served them well for centuries. Escort ships were assigned to protect convoys, their primary mission to deter U-boat attacks and shepherd the merchant vessels safely to port. When a submarine was detected, the standard procedure was simple and seemingly logical: drive it away from the convoy and continue on course. The escorts would make aggressive moves toward the submarine contact, forcing it to submerge and lose contact with the convoy, then quickly return to their protective formation. The logic seemed sound to naval strategists who had studied warfare for decades. Why risk the escort ships in prolonged engagements when the goal was protecting the cargo vessels? The escorts were outnumbered. Their primary weapons were depth charges that required close proximity to be effective, and every minute spent chasing submarines was a minute the convoy remained vulnerable to other threats. The defensive doctrine emphasized preservation of force and mission completion over aggressive engagement. But this defensive mindset had a fatal flaw that became increasingly apparent as the war progressed. U-boats that were merely driven away could regroup, call for reinforcements, and attack again. The same submarines were sinking ship after ship, their crews gaining experience and confidence with each successful hunt. German submarine commanders began to view British escorts as minor obstacles rather than serious threats, knowing that a brief dive would usually be enough to escape immediate danger. The escorts were playing defense in a game where only offense could win, but few in the Royal Navy hierarchy recognized this fundamental problem. The institutional culture favored caution, preservation of assets, and adherence to established doctrine. Innovation was discouraged, and officers who suggested radical departures from accepted practice were often viewed with suspicion by their superiors. Into this desperate situation stepped a man the Royal Navy had already written off as a failure. Captain Frederick John Walker, known to his friends as Johnny, was born in Plymouth in 1896 into a naval family that understood the sea's call. His father had served in the merchant marine, and young Frederick grew up hearing stories of distant ports and maritime adventures. He joined the Royal Navy as a cadet at age 13, showing early promise and dedication that marked him as a potential future leader. During World War I, Walker served aboard various ships including the battleship HMS Ajax and several destroyers. He witnessed firsthand the devastating effectiveness of German U-boats during their first unrestricted submarine warfare campaign. The experience left a deep impression on the young officer, who began to study anti-submarine tactics with the intensity of a scholar. His expertise in this specialized field grew during the interwar years, but his career had stagnated in ways that frustrated both Walker and his family. The Royal Navy of the 1920s and 1930s was an institution bound by tradition and hierarchy. Promotion came slowly, often based more on social connections and political considerations than on merit or innovation. Walker, despite his growing expertise in anti-submarine warfare, found himself passed over for prestigious commands while less qualified officers advanced through the ranks. His outspoken nature and tendency to question established procedures didn't endear him to conservative superiors who valued conformity above creativity. By 1937, Walker found himself relegated to a desk job as experimental commander at HMS Osprey, a shore-based training establishment. The Royal Navy, in its infinite wisdom, had decided he was past his prime at the age of 41. The official reasoning was that he lacked the political skills necessary for high command, but Walker suspected his reputation as a maverick had finally caught up with him. At 43, he was forced into early retirement, his dreams of naval glory seemingly over before they had truly begun. The early retirement was devastating both professionally and personally. Walker faced an uncertain future, struggling financially as his naval pension was insufficient to maintain his family's standard of living. He watched younger officers advance while he was forgotten, relegated to civilian life just as his expertise in anti-submarine warfare was becoming increasingly relevant. His wife Eileen provided emotional support, but the frustration of unfulfilled potential weighed heavily on Walker's mind during those difficult years. When World War II erupted in September 1939, Britain desperately needed experienced naval officers. The Royal Navy, facing a massive expansion and the prospect of global warfare, was forced to recall many retired officers to active duty. Walker was among those summoned back to service, but not to command a prestigious battleship or cruiser as he might have hoped. Instead, he was assigned to what many considered the mundane task of convoy escort duty, a role that the naval establishment viewed as necessary but unglamorous. The assignment to convoy escort work was seen by many as a consolation prize, a way to utilize Walker's experience without giving him a truly important command. Senior officers in the Admiralty viewed escort duty as primarily defensive, requiring competence but not brilliance. The real glory, they believed, lay with the battle fleet, the aircraft carriers, and the cruiser squadrons that would engage the enemy in decisive actions. Convoy escort was about endurance and routine, not tactical innovation or strategic thinking. In 1941, Walker took command of the sloop HMS Stork and the 36th Escort Group. The Stork was not an impressive vessel by naval standards, a small warship designed for patrol duties rather than fleet actions. Her armament consisted of a single 4-inch gun, several smaller weapons, and depth charge throwers for anti-submarine work. She was functional rather than glamorous, but Walker saw in her and her crew the potential for something extraordinary. To the naval establishment, this was a defensive, unglamorous assignment suitable for an officer whose career had already peaked. To Walker, it was a chance for redemption and an opportunity to test ideas that had been forming in his mind for years. He understood that the Battle of the Atlantic would be won or lost not in dramatic fleet actions, but in the grinding daily struggle to protect the merchant ships that carried Britain's lifeline. The standard escort doctrine that Walker inherited was deeply flawed, and he knew it from his first patrol. He had watched U-boats escape time and again, only to return and claim more victims in subsequent attacks. The defensive mentality that prioritized convoy protection above all else was allowing the enemy to dictate the terms of engagement, choosing when and where to attack, while the escorts could only react to threats rather than eliminate them. Walker began to develop a revolutionary idea that would be considered heretical by naval standards. His concept challenged not just tactics, but the fundamental philosophy underlying anti-submarine warfare. What if, instead of merely driving off U-boats, the escorts hunted them to destruction? What if they abandoned the convoy temporarily to pursue and kill the submarine threat? What if the best defense was actually an uncompromising, relentless offense? The risks were enormous and obvious to anyone with naval training. Leaving merchant ships unprotected, even briefly, violated every principle of convoy escort duty that had been developed over centuries of naval warfare. The convoy was the primary asset, the thing that must be protected at all costs. Escorts were expendable, merchant ships and their cargoes were not. The idea of deliberately weakening convoy protection to chase submarines seemed like tactical madness to officers trained in traditional naval doctrine. But Walker's logic was compelling to anyone willing to listen. One destroyed U-boat would save dozens of merchant ships in future attacks. A submarine sent to the bottom could never threaten another convoy, never train new crews, never pass on tactical knowledge to other commanders. The mathematics of attrition favored aggressive action over passive defense, but convincing his superiors of this would require more than mathematical arguments. His superiors at Western Approach's command thought the idea was not just wrong, but dangerously irresponsible. The Admiralty had invested decades in developing convoy protection doctrine, learning from the experiences of World War I and the early years of the current conflict. The notion of escort ships abandoning their charges to chase submarines seemed like tactical madness that could result in catastrophic losses of merchant shipping. Admiral Sir Percy Noble, Commander-in-Chief Western Approaches, was particularly skeptical of Walker's proposals. Noble was a competent officer who understood the importance of convoy protection, but he was also a conservative commander who believed in proven methods rather than untested innovations. When Walker submitted reports suggesting more aggressive tactics, Noble's staff usually filed them away without serious consideration. But Walker was convinced that the current approach was failing, and desperate times called for desperate measures. The statistics spoke for themselves. Merchant ship losses were mounting, U-boat numbers were increasing, and the defensive tactics weren't working. Something had to change, and Walker believed he had the answer. He began preparing for the opportunity to prove his theories in actual combat, knowing that success would vindicate his ideas, while failure might end his career permanently. December 1941 provided the perfect opportunity to test his revolutionary theories. Convoy HG-76, comprising 32 merchant ships loaded with vital supplies, was preparing to make the dangerous crossing from Gibraltar to Britain. Intelligence reports indicated that multiple U-boats were lying in wait along the route, positioned to intercept the convoy as it entered the most dangerous waters of the Atlantic. The German submarine commanders were confident, experienced, and eager for another successful hunt. Walker, commanding his escort group aboard HMS Stork, decided to implement his aggressive new tactics despite the risks to his career and reputation. He briefed his officers on the new approach, explaining that they would no longer simply drive off U-boats, but would hunt them to destruction regardless of how long it took. Some of his subordinates were skeptical, having been trained in traditional methods, but Walker's conviction and detailed planning gradually won them over. The convoy had barely cleared Gibraltar when sonar operators aboard HMS Stork detected U-boat U-574 stalking the merchant ships. The German submarine, commanded by Kapitänleutnant Dietrich Gengelbach, was positioning itself for a classic Wolfpack attack. Under standard procedure, Walker should have driven the submarine away with a few depth charges and continued protecting the convoy. Instead, he ordered a relentless pursuit that would last for hours and test every principle of naval warfare. Walker coordinated his ships with precision that surprised even his own officers. He used HMS Stork to maintain sonar contact while other escorts maneuvered to attack positions. When U-574 attempted to escape by diving deep and changing course, Walker's ships followed relentlessly, dropping depth charges in carefully calculated patterns designed to force the submarine toward the surface. The German crew, accustomed to British escorts giving up after a brief engagement, found themselves trapped in a nightmare of continuous attack. In a move that epitomized his aggressive philosophy and shocked observers, Walker ordered HMS Stork to ram U-574 directly. The collision was devastating for the German submarine, which was crushed by the impact and sent to the bottom with all 45 hands. The ramming damaged Stork's bow, but the ship remained operational and ready to continue the fight. Walker had demonstrated that he was willing to risk his own ship to ensure the destruction of the enemy. But Walker wasn't finished with his demonstration of aggressive tactics. Throughout the convoy's journey across the Atlantic, his escort group hunted down and destroyed 4 more U-boats using similar relentless pursuit methods. Each engagement followed the same pattern: detection, pursuit, and destruction, rather than the traditional detection, harassment, and withdrawal. The German submarine commanders found themselves facing an entirely new type of opponent, one who refused to follow the established rules of engagement. The results were staggering and undeniable. 5 U-boats destroyed, minimal losses to the convoy, and a clear demonstration that aggressive hunting tactics could work in practice as well as theory. The convoy reached Britain with most of its cargo intact, while the German submarine force had suffered losses that would take months to replace. The Admiralty was forced to take notice of Walker's methods, even if some senior officers remained skeptical of his unorthodox approach. Walker was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for his leadership during the HG-76 convoy, and his methods began to gain serious consideration from Naval Command. Reports of his success reached the highest levels of the Royal Navy, including Admiral Sir Dudley Pound, the first Sea Lord, who began to question whether traditional escort doctrine needed fundamental revision. With the success of HG-76 proving his concept beyond doubt, Walker refined and perfected his revolutionary tactics. He developed what became known as the creeping attack, where one ship maintained sonar contact with a submerged U-boat, while a second ship approached silently to deliver depth charges. This method solved the persistent problem of submarines evading detection during the final approach phase of an attack, when the attacking ship's own sonar would be disrupted by its movement through the water. The creeping attack required precise coordination between 2 ships, with the contact keeper providing continuous updates on the submarine's position while the attacking vessel approached from a different angle. The technique demanded exceptional seamanship and communication skills, but when executed properly, it was devastatingly effective against submarines that thought they had escaped detection. Another innovation was the barrage attack, involving multiple ships laying a coordinated carpet of depth charges over a suspected U-boat position. By saturating a large area with explosives, Walker's ships dramatically increased the likelihood of achieving a kill even when the submarine's exact position was uncertain. The technique was expensive in terms of ammunition, but the results justified the expenditure when measured against the value of merchant ships saved. Walker also employed what he called the hold-down technique, keeping U-boats submerged until they exhausted their air supply and battery power, forcing them to surface where they could be destroyed by gunfire. German submarines of the era had limited underwater endurance, typically able to remain submerged for only 16 to 20 hours before requiring fresh air and battery charging. By maintaining continuous contact and preventing surfacing, Walker's ships could force submarines into increasingly desperate situations. Training became obsessive under Walker's command, with exercises conducted in all weather conditions and at all hours of the day and night. He drilled his crews relentlessly, ensuring perfect coordination and split-second timing in every aspect of anti-submarine warfare. Every member of his escort group understood that their mission was not just to protect convoys, but to actively hunt and destroy the enemy wherever they could be found. Walker's leadership style was hands-on and demanding, but also inspirational. He shared the dangers and hardships of his crews, often remaining on the bridge for days during critical operations. His officers and men developed an almost fanatical devotion to their commander, knowing that his innovative tactics were saving lives and winning the war. The transformation of ordinary sailors into an elite submarine hunting force was one of Walker's greatest achievements. In 1943, Walker was given command of the newly formed 2nd Support Group, consisting of 6 sloops with his flagship HMS Starling. Unlike traditional escort groups tied to specific convoys, this unit was tasked with actively hunting U-boats across the Atlantic. They were free-ranging hunters, able to pursue submarines wherever intelligence indicated their presence, unencumbered by the need to protect slow-moving merchant vessels. The 2nd Support Group represented the full flowering of Walker's tactical concepts. These ships were equipped with the latest radar and sonar equipment, their crews were trained to Walker's exacting standards, and their mission was purely offensive. They could operate independently, following up intelligence reports and hunting submarines in their own waters rather than waiting for the enemy to come to them. The results were immediate and spectacular, exceeding even Walker's optimistic expectations. In June 1943, Walker's group sank U-202 and U-119 in coordinated attacks that demonstrated the lethal efficiency of his methods. The destruction of U-202 was particularly satisfying, as this submarine had been responsible for sinking numerous merchant ships before encountering Walker's hunters. The crew of U-119 managed to abandon ship before it sank, providing valuable intelligence about German submarine operations and tactics. The following month brought even greater success in the Bay of Biscay, where Walker's ships destroyed 3 U-boats in a single day. The action began when HMS Starling detected U-504 attempting to transit the bay en route to operational waters. Instead of a brief engagement, Walker coordinated a sustained attack that lasted several hours and resulted in the submarine's destruction. Before the day was over, his group had also sunk U-607 and U-461, demonstrating the devastating effectiveness of concentrated anti-submarine operations. The playing of a "Hunting We Will Go" over the ship's speakers became Walker's signature celebration of successful kills. His crews adopted the tune as their unofficial anthem, playing it whenever they sent another U-boat to the bottom. The psychological effect was profound, both boosting Allied morale and striking fear into German submarine crews, who began to hear stories of the relentless British hunter who celebrated each kill with music. Walker's aggressive tactics and relentless pursuit earned him a fearsome reputation among both Allied and German naval circles. His name became synonymous with anti-submarine warfare excellence, and other escort commanders began studying his methods and attempting to replicate his success. The Royal Navy started incorporating Walker's innovations into official doctrine, spreading his techniques throughout the fleet. But the war extracted a terrible personal cost from Walker that few outside his immediate family understood. In 1943, he received devastating news that his son Timothy, serving aboard the submarine HMS Parthian, was missing in action and presumed lost with all hands. The submarine had failed to return from a patrol in the Mediterranean, and despite extensive search efforts, no trace was ever found of the vessel or her crew. The loss of his son was a crushing blow that Walker bore with characteristic stoicism, but those close to him could see the pain in his eyes. Despite this personal tragedy, Walker pressed on with his mission, channeling his grief into an even more determined pursuit of the enemy. Some observers believe that the loss of Timothy intensified Walker's hatred of submarines, driving him to even greater efforts in hunting down U-boats. February 1944 brought Walker's most successful patrol yet, a mission that would become legendary in naval history. In a single operation lasting several weeks, his second support group destroyed 6 U-boats in a series of engagements that demonstrated the peak of anti-submarine warfare effectiveness. The patrol began with intelligence reports indicating heavy U-boat activity in the western approaches, and Walker's group was dispatched to investigate and engage. The first kill came when HMS Starling detected U-592 attempting to attack a convoy. Walker's ships immediately implemented their proven tactics, with multiple vessels coordinating to trap the submarine and prevent its escape. The engagement lasted several hours, but the outcome was never in doubt once Walker's hunters had established contact. U-592 was destroyed with all hands, the first of 6 submarines that would fall victim to the second support group during this remarkable patrol. The efficiency and coordination of Walker's attacks had reached a level that seemed almost supernatural to both friend and foe. His ships moved with precision that spoke of countless hours of training and absolute confidence in their methods. U-boat crews began referring to Walker as the Devil of the Atlantic, a hunter who appeared without warning and showed no mercy to his prey. The effectiveness of Walker's methods did not go unnoticed by Admiral Karl Dönitz, the mastermind of Germany's submarine warfare campaign. Intelligence reports reaching German naval headquarters painted a picture of a new type of British commander, one who had fundamentally changed the rules of anti-submarine warfare. Dönitz, a man not given to praise of his enemies, was forced to acknowledge Walker as his most formidable adversary. German U-boat crews, once confident in their ability to evade British escorts, now operated under a cloud of fear whenever they entered the western approaches. Stories of Walker's relentless hunts spread through the submarine fleet, creating a psychological burden that affected crew performance and morale. The mere possibility of encountering Walker's group was enough to make experienced U-boat commanders reconsider their tactics and approach their missions with unprecedented caution. Dönitz ordered intensive study of Walker's methods, attempting to develop countermeasures against the aggressive hunting tactics that were decimating his submarine fleet. German naval intelligence analyzed every available report of Walker's engagements, looking for weaknesses that could be exploited or patterns that could be predicted. But the fundamental problem remained. Walker had shifted the paradigm from defense to offense, and the U-boat fleet was struggling to adapt to this new reality. As the Allies prepared for the D-Day landings in June 1944, Walker's role became crucial to the success of the entire operation. Operation Overlord, the long-awaited invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe, would require the largest amphibious assault in human history. His mission was to protect the massive invasion fleet from U-boat attacks during the most vulnerable phase of the assault, when thousands of ships would be concentrated in the English Channel. The responsibility was enormous and weighed heavily on Walker's mind. The success of Operation Overlord depended on getting 156,000 troops safely across the Channel and onto the beaches of Normandy. A successful U-boat attack on the invasion fleet could have catastrophic consequences, potentially derailing the entire liberation of Western Europe and extending the war by months or years. Walker understood that this was the moment when all his innovations and training would be put to the ultimate test. For 2 weeks, Walker's second support group patrolled the English Channel and surrounding waters with relentless vigilance. His ships maintained constant anti-submarine sweeps using their proven hunting tactics to keep German submarines at bay. The group operated with clockwork precision, their crews alert for any sign of enemy activity, while the greatest armada in history assembled for the assault on Hitler's fortress Europe. The results exceeded all expectations and validated every aspect of Walker's tactical innovations. Not a single U-boat managed to penetrate Walker's defensive screen during the critical period of the landings. His ships maintained constant patrols, using their aggressive hunting tactics to detect and destroy any submarine threats before they could reach the invasion fleet. The success of D-Day owed much to Walker's ability to ensure the safe passage of the invasion force. But the constant strain of operations was taking a severe toll on Walker's health, though he refused to acknowledge the warning signs that were becoming apparent to those around him. Known for his tireless work ethic and hands-on leadership style, he had been pushing himself beyond human limits for months. The physical and mental demands of continuous anti-submarine operations, combined with the emotional weight of command decisions that meant life or death for thousands, were wearing him down in ways that would soon prove fatal. Walker's dedication to duty was legendary among his crews, but it came at a terrible personal cost. He rarely left his ship during operations, often remaining on the bridge for days at a time during critical missions. His officers noticed that he was losing weight, that his hands sometimes trembled with exhaustion, and that he seemed to be driving himself with an intensity that bordered on obsession. On July 7, 1944, just weeks after the successful completion of the Normandy landings, Walker suffered a cerebral thrombosis while aboard HMS Starling. The stroke struck without warning as he was reviewing intelligence reports in his cabin, and he collapsed unconscious at his desk. He was rushed to the Royal Naval Hospital at Seaforth, but his condition was grave and the damage to his brain was extensive. 2 days later, on July 9, 1944, Captain Frederick John Walker died at the age of 48. The official cause of death was listed as overwork and exhaustion, a clinical description that barely captured the reality of a man who had literally worked himself to death in service to his country. The irony was bitter. The officer whom the Royal Navy had once considered a failure had died from the strain of achieving unprecedented success. The news of Walker's death sent shockwaves through the Royal Navy and beyond. Here was a man who had revolutionized naval warfare, saved countless lives, and played a crucial role in the Allied victory, yet he had paid the ultimate price for his dedication. Senior officers who had once dismissed his ideas now praised his innovations, while ordinary sailors mourned the loss of a commander who had shown them how to win against impossible odds. A funeral service was held at Liverpool Cathedral, attended by over 1,000 mourners including senior naval officers, government officials, and ordinary sailors whose lives Walker had touched. The service was both a celebration of his achievements and a somber reminder of the cost of victory. Representatives from Allied navies attended to pay their respects to a man whose innovations had influenced anti-submarine warfare far beyond the Royal Navy. Walker's coffin was then carried through the streets of Liverpool to the River Mersey, where it was placed aboard HMS Hesperus for burial at sea. It was fitting that the man who had spent his life defending the sea lanes should find his final rest in the waters he had protected so well. The ceremony was conducted with full naval honors, and as the coffin slipped beneath the waves, many of those present reflected on the extraordinary transformation of a rejected officer into a naval legend. Under Walker's direct command, 20 U-boats were destroyed, more than any other Allied naval commander achieved during the war. But his true legacy lay not in the numbers, impressive though they were, but in the revolutionary tactics he developed and the fundamental change he brought to anti-submarine warfare. His aggressive hunting methods became standard practice for Allied navies, transforming the Battle of the Atlantic from a defensive struggle into an offensive campaign that ultimately secured victory. The principles Walker established continued to influence naval warfare long after his death, proving that his innovations were not merely tactical tricks, but fundamental insights into the nature of submarine warfare. During the Korean War, American naval forces applied his hunting group concepts against North Korean and Chinese submarines with considerable success. The Cold War saw further development of his tactics, as NATO navies prepared to counter the massive Soviet submarine threat using methods that trace their lineage directly back to Walker's innovations. Modern anti-submarine warfare still bears the fingerprints of Walker's revolutionary thinking in ways that would have amazed the captain himself. The concept of hunter-killer groups, the emphasis on aggressive pursuit rather than passive defense, and the coordination of multiple platforms in submarine hunting operations all stem from the tactics he pioneered in the desperate days of 1943 and 1944. Today's naval officers study Walker's methods as fundamental principles of anti-submarine warfare. In 1998, a statue of Captain Walker was unveiled at Liverpool's Pierhead, overlooking the Mersey River and the sea lanes he had defended so effectively. The memorial serves as a permanent reminder of the man who transformed from a rejected officer into one of the greatest naval tacticians in history. The inscription reads simply, Captain F.J. Walker, CBDSO, in 3 bars, the finest submarine killer of all time. Walker's story represents something profound about human potential and the power of unconventional thinking in times of crisis. Here was a man whom the naval establishment had written off as past his prime, relegated to what was considered a secondary role in what many viewed as a defensive war. Yet when given the opportunity, he revolutionized an entire branch of warfare and played a crucial role in determining the outcome of the most important conflict in human history. The insane tactics that his superiors initially dismissed as reckless and irresponsible proved to be exactly what was needed to turn the tide in the Battle of the Atlantic. Walker's willingness to challenge conventional wisdom, to risk his career on untested ideas, and to persist in the face of institutional resistance ultimately saved thousands of lives and helped secure Allied victory in the war that determined the fate of civilization. His legacy reminds us that innovation often comes from unexpected sources, that the greatest breakthroughs may come from those whom others have dismissed as failures or misfits. In Walker's case, rejection by the naval establishment freed him from the constraints of conventional thinking, allowing him to develop the radical new approaches that conventional officers might never have considered. Sometimes being an outsider is exactly what enables revolutionary thinking. The transformation of Frederick John Walker from a rejected captain to the Royal Navy's greatest U-boat hunter stands as one of the most remarkable personal stories of World War II. It demonstrates that sometimes the most important victories are won not by following the rules, but by having the courage to break them when the situation demands fundamental change. Walker's story proves that individual initiative and innovative thinking can change the course of history. Today, as we face new challenges and seemingly insurmountable problems, Walker's example offers hope and inspiration for those willing to think differently. His story suggests that the solutions we need may already exist in the minds of those whom conventional wisdom has overlooked or dismissed. Sometimes the most insane idea is the one that saves the world, and sometimes the greatest heroes are those whom others have forgotten or written off as failures. Captain Frederick John Walker died as he had lived in his final years, in service to his country and his fellow sailors. His grave lies beneath the waters of the Atlantic he defended, but his legacy lives on in every naval officer who understands that the best defense is sometimes a relentless, uncompromising attack. The rejected captain had become immortal, his insane tactics forever changing the course of history and proving that sometimes the greatest victories come from the most unexpected sources. If you found Captain Walker's incredible story as fascinating as we did, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more untold stories of history's most remarkable heroes. We dive deep into the forgotten tales of courage, innovation, and determination that changed the world. Hit that like button if this story of the rejected captain who revolutionized naval warfare impressed you, and don't forget to leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What other rejected or overlooked figures from history do you think deserve to have their stories told? Your suggestions help us decide which incredible stories to explore next. And if you enjoyed learning about Captain Walker's insane tactics that became a U-boat's worst nightmare, check out our other videos about military innovations and the brilliant minds behind them. History is full of people who changed everything by thinking differently, and we're here to tell their stories. Subscribe now and join our community of history enthusiasts who believe that the most important lessons often come from the most unexpected places. Ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest historical discoveries.